Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Thursday, the 12th of March, 2026. We continue our daily live coverage of the US-Israeli war on Iran. Today, can drinking water be a weapon of war? And why are oil prices still rising after the biggest release of reserves in history? You think the war on oil is bad? Wait for the war on water. Attacks on oil facilities in Iran and the Gulf have seen black rain fall from the sky and oil prices soar to over $100 a barrel. But in the firing line of escalating warfare, there's a resource even more precious than oil. Fresh water runs scarce, and tens of millions of thirsty people rely on 400 desalination plants lining the Persian Gulf. This infrastructure is arguably the region's greatest Achilles heel. In the UAE and Kuwait, 90% of drinking water is desalinated seawater. In Oman, it's 86%, and in Saudi Arabia, 70%. No one wants a war on water, but the first stone has already been thrown. On the 7th of March, Iran's foreign minister claimed the US struck a desalination plant on the country's Qeshm Island. He warned the US set this precedent, not Iran. The next day, Bahrain's government said an Iranian drone strike damaged a Bahraini desalination plant. If confirmed, direct attacks on drinking water violate the laws of war. Iran says the US struck first. But it's a rule of war that an outmatched army will use unconventional tactics. Iran's playbook against America's military might is apparent. Hit regional allies where it hurts and hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage. Did those waging this war understand what war would look like? How likely is a war on water? And just how destructive would it be? I'm joined now by one of the leading scientific voices on water conflict, Dr. Peter Gleich. Dr. Gleich, welcome to MEE Live. We're really keen to get your perspective here. So far, desalination plant attacks have been limited to 2 reported strikes. If this escalates, just how devastating could that become? Dr. Gleich, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay. Would you just talk us through how devastating the situation would be if it became a strategy of this war to target desalination plants in the region?
Well, first of all, let me be pretty clear that attacks on civilian water infrastructure, like desalination plants, are violations of international law. And in the Gulf region in particular, such attacks would be extremely devastating. The Gulf countries are tremendously dependent on desalination for drinking water. Some of those countries rely on 50% or 80% or more of their drinking water from these desalination plants. And any attacks on these plants would cut that water supply tremendously. And there's very little backup. There are very few alternatives in these countries to the water produced by those facilities.
Presumably it's not just drinking water. I mean, the agricultural industry could suffer. People could run short of food as well. What are the ripple effects?
Yes, that's true, although most of the Gulf countries do not use desalinated water for agriculture because it's so expensive. As a result, many of these countries import most of their food. There's very limited internal agricultural production, especially with desalinated water. But there would be enormous disruptions, not just to civilian populations, but to industrial production, to commercial production. Most of these countries rely on desalination for almost all of their water needs.
And what protections are in place to prevent this very vulnerable infrastructure becoming a target? What can be done or what needs to be done to make sure the situation you painted out doesn't happen?
Well, first of all, the most important thing is simply to try and prevent these attacks from happening. As I mentioned, they're violations of international law, and the militaries should understand that they're violations of international law, and these plants should not be targeted during conflicts. Having said that, these plants are sometimes targeted during conflicts, and we've seen that in the past. there's very little that can be done to protect them if they are intentionally targeted. They're very large plants. They depend on a tremendous amount of energy. There's a lot of equipment that's involved, pipeline and membrane systems that are very vulnerable to attacks. There's not much that can be done if the plants are intentionally targeted.
You
the
said
countries
that
could try and produce some kind of storage to have some backup, but in the long run, the best idea is simply to prevent these plants from becoming targeted.
I mean, that's pretty terrifying. And you said that this has happened before, because so far it seems that the attacks on desalination plants have been fairly restrained, and there's a question mark whether any state is really willing to plunge the war into that territory. However, you said that there have been previous attacks. Just talk us through the precedent to this kind of warfare.
Yes, there is. In the 1991 Gulf War, the first Gulf War, Iraq attacked many of the desalination plants in Kuwait and damaged much of Kuwait's desalination systems that have now been rebuilt. Israel has attacked the Palestinian small desalination plants in Gaza during their war with Gaza. We have seen this in the past. Yes, in the past week, we've seen two small attacks, one reported by Iran on a limited desalination plant on an island owned by Iran. The following day, Iran was reported to have attacked a desalination plant in Bahrain. Hopefully, these are the extent of the attacks that we see. But again, there has been precedent for this, and I'm hoping that the limited attacks we've seen are the only attacks that will result.
It's a bit of a trope, I suppose, within academic circles that future wars will be fought not over oil, but over water, particularly in the Middle East. What are your thoughts on that? Is that likely to be the case in your view? How big a role does water scarcity play in conflict already?
It plays a tremendous role. One of the things we do at my Pacific Institute, my research institute, is we maintain something called the Water Conflict Chronology, which is a database of conflicts over water going back thousands of years. And unfortunately, there are thousands of examples in this database of cases where water has been a trigger of conflicts where people fight over access or control of water, or where water has been a casualty of conflict, like we're talking about here, where water systems have been attacked in wars that start for other reasons, or where water systems have been weapons of conflicts. And unfortunately, in the last few decades, the number of incidents of violence associated with water resources has gone way up. There's been a tremendous increase in the use of water as a weapon or a casualty or a trigger of conflict. As water becomes more scarce, water's importance to civilian populations and to industry grows, and it becomes more tempting to use water as a weapon of conflict. And the world community needs to get a handle on that.
I suppose my final question, just to sum up then, is based on what you've seen so far. How worried are you about this situation with water in the Middle East and the war?
Well, it's terrible to see that there have already been some attacks on desalination facilities. Hopefully those are limited and that they won't continue to occur as countries wake up to their vulnerability to this kind of attack. And it's important to understand that water systems are vital for civilian populations, and that attacks on water are violations of international law. If the world community understands that, and if the countries involved in the current conflict understand that, hopefully water systems will be taken out of the equation and will not be casualties of conflict or weapons used during these conflicts.
Dr. Peter Gleich, thank you so much for your time today.